Tao wiped her hands on the worn apron, the familiar clatter of dishes and the murmur of conversations filling the small cafe where she worked. She moved through the tables with practiced ease, a polite smile painted on her tired face, hiding the restless storm inside her heart. Today was just another day, or so she thought, until a moment frozen in time shattered the monotony. As she carried a tray stacked with cups and plates toward a corner table, her eyes caught a flash of something unusual on the wall of the upscale restaurant next door. Curiosity pulled her closer, and there it was, a framed photograph, yellowed at the edges, displayed with a quiet pride in the grand lobby of the luxury building owned by Min, the powerful businessman everyone in town whispered about. Her breath caught. The little girl in the photograph, those wide, innocent eyes, the tangled black curls, the hesitant smile, was unmistakably her. 4 years old, standing beside a woman she didn't recognize, holding a teddy bear tightly as if it were the only thing that kept her safe. It was her. But how? Why? The room around her blurred. Time slowed as memories, fragments of forgotten laughter and distant lullabies, surged through her mind like a tidal wave. She had always known there was something missing in her story, a blank space where her past should be. Growing up in cold institutions, moving from one foster home to another, she had learned to hold her secrets close, to believe she was invisible. But this photograph was proof that her past was tangled up in the life of a man whose name meant power and wealth, but whose eyes she had never dared to meet. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, tracing the faded lines of her childhood face. The feeling was surreal, almost cruel, an echo of a life that could have been hers, somewhere beyond the cold walls and endless nights. She swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat, eyes prickling with tears she refused to shed in public. In that instant, the bustling sounds of the city faded into silence. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, even the chatter around her became distant echoes. All she could hear was the pounding of her own heart, a rhythm filled with hope, confusion, and a fierce longing to uncover the truth buried deep beneath layers of silence. Who was the woman beside her in the photo? What connection did she have to Min? And why had no one ever told her that her story was already written somewhere in the shadows of that opulent mansion? For the first time in her life, Tao felt the fragile stirrings of a new journey, one that promised answers but also threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew about herself. The discovery was unexpected, but it ignited a fire within her, a desperate need to reclaim the fragments of a past stolen too soon. With a final, lingering glance at the photograph, she turned away, the weight of the unknown settling on her shoulders. This was no longer just a job, no longer just survival. This was the beginning of a search for truth, for identity, for the family she never knew she had, and the scars she was ready to face. The days that followed the discovery of the photograph were a whirlwind of restless nights and aching questions for Tao. The image haunted her dreams, replaying itself like a ghostly echo that refused to be silenced. Who was the woman beside her in that faded frame? And why was her own childhood tethered so tightly to a man she had never met, one who lived in a world so distant from her own? Her memories of childhood were fragmented, blurred like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. She recalled the cold sterility of orphanages where laughter was scarce and love was a distant concept. She remembered the endless shuffle of foster homes, each door closing behind her with a finality that stung sharper than any physical wound. No one had ever told her the truth about her origins. No one had ever spoken her name with tenderness or pride. She had grown up believing she was nothing more than a shadow, a forgotten child cast aside by the world. But beneath that brittle exterior of survival lay a fragile heart desperate to understand. She began to dig, to search for whispers of her past in the places most would overlook. The dusty archives of child welfare offices, the faded newspaper clippings hidden in forgotten drawers, and the hesitant memories of strangers who once crossed her path. Each piece she uncovered was a puzzle fragment, sharp and jagged, hinting at a story darker than she had ever imagined. It was then that the name Lon surfaced, like a beacon in the fog. Lon, the woman in the photograph, the mother she never knew. A name whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear by those who remembered her brief but fiery presence in the city's undercurrents. Lon was not just a mother. She was a fierce advocate, a soul who fought against the injustices that plagued the vulnerable, especially children like Tao. Tao learned that Lan had been a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope in a system riddled with corruption and cruelty. She had stood up against the shadowy networks that exploited orphan children for profit, battling powerful men who sought to silence her. Among them was Min, the same man whose mansion now held the photograph of a little girl who was, impossibly, her. The revelation cut deeper than any blade. Min was not just a distant figure of wealth and influence. He was a man intricately woven into the fabric of her family's tragedy. Stories whispered of his cold ambition, of deals struck in dimly lit rooms, and of a web of secrets that protected him from scrutiny. And in the center of that web was Lan, a woman who had dared to defy him, and paid the ultimate price. The truth was a wound that refused to heal. Tao uncovered that Lan had died under suspicious circumstances, a staged accident that had robbed her of life and stolen the chance for justice. Official records were scant and suspiciously altered, and amid the shadows, Min emerged as the sole beneficiary of a sizable life insurance policy linked to Lan's death. Worse still, the documents suggested that Tao herself had been legally erased, declared dead or missing in the eyes of the law, as if her existence was inconvenient and needed to be erased. Anger, grief, and confusion swirled within Tao like a storm. How could the man who possibly destroyed her family now live in comfort, wearing a mask of respectability? How many lies had been spun to hide the truth? The world that had seemed so vast and impenetrable suddenly shrank to a terrifying close. Her entire life, a fragile thread pulled taut between hope and despair. Yet within that storm, something fierce and unyielding was born. Tao's pain became a fire, her sorrow a driving force. She would not let the shadows consume her. She would not let her mother's voice be silenced again. The pieces of her shattered past would be put back together, no matter the cost. Determined, she vowed to confront the darkness that had haunted her bloodline for so long, to expose the lies, to fight for the truth, and to reclaim the life that was stolen from her. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with danger and betrayal, but Tao knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would no longer be invisible. Her journey was no longer just about finding answers. It was about reclaiming her identity, her dignity, and the legacy of a mother's love that death could never extinguish. The night air was thick with silence as Tao sat alone in her tiny apartment, the dim light from a flickering candle casting long shadows against the peeling walls. Her fingers trembled as she held the worn photograph, her fragile link to a past that seemed both distant and unbearably close. Every heartbeat echoed with the weight of questions demanding answers, but the truth felt like a distant star, elusive and cold. She knew she couldn't stay in the shadows anymore. The fragments of her past, the whispered secrets, the hidden faces, everything beckoned her forward, toward a truth buried beneath layers of deceit. She steeled herself, wiping away the tears that threatened to spill, and made a silent vow to uncover what had been kept from her for so long. The next morning, armed with nothing but a small bag and a fierce determination, Tao ventured into the city's underbelly, where power and corruption mingled behind closed doors. She began at the records office, a dusty, forgotten place where time seemed to stand still. The clerk's indifferent eyes barely lifted as she requested files that officials had hoped would remain buried. But Tao's resolve was a silent storm. No bureaucratic walls could withstand the force of a daughter's quest for truth. Hours blurred into days as she sifted through faded documents, yellowed letters, and fragile papers that whispered stories of betrayal and broken promises. Every discovery was a shard of glass, painful yet illuminating. She learned of her mother Lan's tireless fight against a powerful syndicate that exploited children for profit, a battle that had made enemies out of men with iron fists and frozen hearts. Among the papers she found a journal, its edges tattered and pages stained with time. The handwriting was unmistakably Lan's. Fiery, passionate, raw. Reading her mother's words, Tao felt an unbearable closeness, as if the voice of the woman she never knew was speaking directly into her soul. Lan's writing spoke of hope, courage, and an unyielding love that transcended even the darkest nights. But alongside hope lay shadow, threats, intimidation, and a final desperate warning. Lon had known she was in danger. She had sensed the claws of Min tightening around her world. The journal ended abruptly, mid-sentence, leaving a chilling silence that echoed louder than any scream. Determined to confront the man who had cast this long shadow over her life, Tao arranged to meet Min under the guise of seeking employment. The mansion loomed ahead, an imposing fortress of wealth and secrets, its marble floors and gilded halls a stark contrast to the poverty and pain that had shaped her childhood. Inside, Min was a man of polished charm, his smile a practiced mask that barely concealed the cold calculation beneath. Their conversation was a delicate dance, Tao probing gently, Min deflecting with practiced ease. Yet beneath the polite words, a tension crackled like electricity, a silent acknowledgement of the past neither dared to name outright. When Tao finally revealed the photograph, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside, Min's eyes flickered, an involuntary crack in his armor. But his response was calm, almost detached, as if the years had hardened him into someone unrecognizable. He spoke of business, of loss, of decisions made in shadows for the greater good. But his words were hollow echoes compared to the truth that Tao felt buried beneath. As she left the mansion, a cold wind whipped through the courtyard, carrying with it a bitter promise. The path to truth would be long and treacherous. But Tao no longer feared the darkness. The fire kindling in her chest burned brighter than ever, fueled by the memory of a mother's love and the unbreakable bond of blood. She was ready to face whatever shadows lay ahead. The truth was no longer just a distant hope. It was a fierce, living thing inside her, demanding justice, demanding recognition, demanding to be heard. The dim glow of the street lamp outside flickered uncertainly as Tao stepped into the narrow office, its walls lined with fading photographs and yellowed newspaper clippings, remnants of cases long closed but never forgotten. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and stale coffee, mingling with the faint hum of a buzzing fluorescent light overhead. Here, in this forgotten corner of the city, she sought a sliver of hope, a guide through the labyrinth of shadows that had swallowed her past. The private detective, Mr. Hung, was a man weathered by time and tempered by hardship. His face was etched with lines of unspoken stories, eyes sharp and piercing, as if they could cut through lies and deceit to uncover the raw, aching truth beneath. When he looked at her, there was no judgment, only the quiet understanding of someone who had spent years chasing ghosts and uncovering secrets others desperately wanted to keep hidden. Tao's voice trembled as she laid out the photograph and the fragments of her story. The weight of years, lost memories, unanswered questions, and the sting of betrayal pressed heavily on her chest. Yet, beneath the trembling uncertainty was a fierce resolve, a fire kindled by a mother's love and a daughter's desperate need for justice. Mr. Hung listened intently, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the worn wooden desk. "You're chasing shadows," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "But sometimes even shadows leave traces. We'll follow those." Their collaboration began quietly, almost invisibly. Days turned into nights filled with hushed conversations, late-night stakeouts, and relentless digging through tangled webs of paperwork, phone records, and whispered rumors. With every step, Tao felt herself becoming both hunter and hunted, a delicate balance between vulnerability and strength. Together, they unearthed pieces of Lan's life buried beneath layers of deceit, secret meetings, coded messages, and hidden alliances. Each discovery was like a key turning in a lock, revealing glimpses of a larger conspiracy that reached far beyond what Tao had imagined. Min's empire was built not just on bricks and mortar, but on silence bought with fear and loyalty purchased with threats. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, Tao sat with Mr. Hung, their faces illuminated only by the flickering screen of an old laptop. The detective pointed to a grainy video clip captured by a hidden camera, a meeting between Min and a shadowy figure whose face was obscured. Their conversation was brief but chilling, filled with veiled threats and cryptic warnings. Watching the footage, Tao's heart pounded in her chest, not just from fear but from a fierce surge of determination. This was more than a story. It was a battle for truth, for justice, for the memory of her mother who had dared to fight and fallen in silence. In the quiet moments between the storm of revelations, Mr. Hung shared his own story, of battles lost and won in the pursuit of justice, of scars both visible and hidden. It was a reminder to Tao that she was not alone, that the path she walked was rugged and perilous but not without allies. The city outside may have been indifferent, its cold streets echoing with secrets, but inside this cramped office, something fierce and unbreakable was taking shape, a promise to illuminate the darkest corners, to shatter the lies that had kept her family's truth locked away. And as the night deepened, Tao felt a fragile but growing hope, a belief that justice, though delayed, was still within reach. The journey was far from over, but now she had a partner, a witness, a warrior in this fight to reclaim her past and rewrite her future. Tao sat in the dim light of her small apartment, the shadows from the single lamp dancing across the scattered papers and photographs sprawled across the table. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of the secret she carried, a secret that had burrowed deep into her heart, fueling a relentless storm of grief, anger, and hope. Tonight, the quiet stillness was broken only by the rhythmic tapping of rain against the window, each drop echoing like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. She knew that uncovering the truth was no longer enough. It was time to bring it into the light, to shatter the walls of silence that had kept her mother's story buried for far too long. But the path ahead was treacherous, paved with dangers she could scarcely imagine. Min was not just a man of power. He was a fortress of lies, protected by shadows and men who answered only to his cold command. To confront him meant risking everything. Her safety, her sanity, even the fragile hope she clung to. Tao's fingers traced the edges of a folded document, evidence painstakingly gathered with Mr. Hung. Every signature, every coded message was a thread in a tangled web of corruption and betrayal. The plan to expose Min required precision, courage, and an unyielding resolve. It was not just about revealing the truth. It was about dismantling a carefully constructed empire built on fear. She closed her eyes and pictured the moment when the truth would finally break free, when the world would see Min not as the polished businessman but as the man who had stolen her mother's life, who had silenced the brave heart that had dared to fight. The thought brought a fierce fire to her chest, a burning need to right the wrongs that had shaped her very existence. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from Mr. Hung. "Everything's set. Are you ready?" The simple words ignited a tremor of fear and determination. She was ready. More than ready. She was hungry for justice. The plan was daring. A clandestine broadcast during a charity gala Min would attend. A night when the city's elite gathered under glittering chandeliers, oblivious to the darkness beneath their feet. Hidden cameras, live feeds, and undeniable evidence would converge in a storm of revelation. The world would witness the truth in real time, leaving Min no room to hide behind his veneer of respectability. Tao's heart pounded as she rehearsed the sequence in her mind. The hush of the crowd as the screens flickered to life, the gasp that would ripple through the room as faces once cloaked in shadows were illuminated. She imagined the clash of emotions, shock, anger, betrayal, coursing through the veins of those who had turned a blind eye for too long. Yet beneath the adrenaline surged a deep, trembling vulnerability. This was more than a strategic strike. It was a reckoning. For Tao, it was the moment where the past and future collided, where she faced the ghosts that had haunted her childhood and dared to reclaim her life from their grasp. As she prepared, memories of Lan's gentle smile and fierce courage stirred within her, a beacon of strength and love that no darkness could extinguish. The mother she had lost had fought for justice, and now, through Tao, her voice would rise again, clear, unyielding, and impossible to ignore. The night of the gala arrived like a tempest cloaked in elegance. The glittering lights masked the tension simmering beneath the surface. As Min mingled with the city's powerful, unaware of the storm gathering just beyond the polished facade, Tao's heart hammered with a mix of fear and fierce resolve. Then, as if the world itself held its breath, the screens flickered on. The room fell silent. Faces appeared. Lan's worn journal, secret meetings, whispered threats, all laid bare for the first time. Min's confident mask cracked under the weight of undeniable truth, and the echoes of justice began to thunder. In that charged moment, Tao realized that the battle was far from over, but the first, hardest step had been taken. The truth was no longer a hidden shadow. It was a blazing light, unstoppable and free. The night's revelation rippled through the city like a relentless tide, sweeping away the illusions that had long masked the truth. Tao stood just outside the grand hall. Her breath caught in her throat as the last echoes of shocked murmurs faded into a heavy silence. The glittering chandeliers now seemed dimmer, the air thick with a tension that clung to every corner like a stubborn shadow refusing to disperse. Inside, Min's carefully curated world was unraveling at an unbearable speed. The polished veneer cracked, revealing the cold, ruthless man beneath, the architect of so much pain and betrayal. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now flickered with a volatile mix of fear, rage, and disbelief. The crowd that had once hailed him as a titan of industry now turned their gaze away, whispers of condemnation growing louder with each passing second. Outside, Tao's heart raced, a chaotic symphony of relief, sorrow, and exhaustion crashing through her veins. The weight she had carried for so long, the years of silence, the gnawing uncertainty, the heavy burden of secrets, was finally breaking free. Yet, freedom came not as a gentle sigh, but as a fierce storm that left her trembling in its wake. The aftermath was a whirlwind. The media erupted, headlines screamed of scandal and betrayal, and Min's empire began to crumble under the relentless scrutiny. Legal battles surged forward like an unstoppable wave, the courtroom becoming an arena where justice was fought not with fists, but with truth and unyielding resolve. Tao, once a shadow in her own story, now stood at the center, a symbol of courage and the indomitable power of a daughter's love. But justice was never simple. The road was jagged and steep, lined with unexpected betrayals and painful revelations. Allies turned cold, old friends became distant strangers, and the scars of the past reopened with raw intensity. Tao found herself facing not only the external battles but the internal tempest, the aching void left by a mother lost too soon, the silent questions that had no easy answers. Yet amid the chaos, moments of fragile hope blossomed. The truth had awakened a collective conscience, stirring a wave of support from those who refused to let darkness prevail. Strangers reached out with stories of their own, their voices joining hers in a chorus of resilience and healing. It was a painful symphony, but one that echoed with undeniable strength. Tao's nights were restless, haunted by memories that danced between despair and determination. But each morning brought a renewed fire, a promise whispered on the winds of change that justice, though battered and bruised, would endure. She visited the places her mother had loved, touched the worn edges of the journals that had guided her, and felt the presence of a fierce spirit that refused to be silenced. In the courtroom, her testimony was a heartbeat that shattered the lies, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill. Each word was a thread weaving a tapestry of truth, pulling apart the fabric of deception that had cloaked Min for so long. When the final verdict came, it was more than a legal victory. It was a triumph of love, memory, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. As the dust settled, Tao understood that justice was not an end, but a beginning of healing, rebuilding, and reclaiming a life once stolen. The scars remained, etched deep within her soul, but they were no longer chains. They were marks of survival, strength, and an enduring hope. Under the vast, open sky, she whispered a quiet thank you to the mother whose courage had lit her path, a promise that the story would never be forgotten. And as dawn painted the world in hues of gold and promise, Tao stepped forward, ready to write the next chapter, not as a victim of the past, but as the fierce architect of her own future. The courtroom battles had ended, the media frenzy slowly fading like the last embers of a firestorm. Tao stood by the window of her new office, a quiet space filled with sunlight and soft shadows, a world away from the darkness that had once consumed her life. The city sprawled beneath her, alive and restless, as if daring her to dream beyond the past. Justice had been served, but more than that, a new beginning was taking root. The name Min was now a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and cafes, a reminder that power built on lies could never stand the test of truth. For Tao, the victory was bittersweet. The wounds of loss and betrayal still throbbed beneath her calm exterior. But in those wounds, she found a strange kind of strength, the fuel to rebuild not only her life, but a legacy of hope and resilience. Her mother's memory was no longer a shadow but a beacon, guiding her through the uncertain roads ahead. Tao dedicated herself to causes close to her heart, supporting women who had been silenced, fighting corruption with fierce determination, and creating spaces where truth and justice could flourish. Each day was a step forward, each challenge a chance to honor the courage that had been passed down to her. Amidst the whirlwind of change, Tao found moments of peace in unexpected places. A quiet park bench where the wind whispered stories of renewal, the laughter of children in the distance, the warmth of friendship rekindled. She learned to live not just for the past, but for the promise of what could be. Love, too, found its way back into her life. Not the fragile, fleeting kind, but something steady and true. A partner who saw her scars and strength alike, who walked beside her with patience and quiet support. Together, they built a future where the past was a foundation, not a prison. Looking out at the horizon, Tao felt a deep, abiding hope, a feeling that no matter how dark the night, dawn would always come. Her story was no longer just one of pain and loss, but of survival, growth, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. As the sun set, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Tao whispered a promise to herself and to the mother she carried forever in her heart. This is only the beginning.